Welcome, I am Mr. Clock, the creator of the Arma 3 Object Builder add-on for Blender. In this video, I would like to talk about the RTM animation importing process into Blender. If you want to preview them back in Blender, the first thing we will need is an armature, a skeleton, to apply the animation to. So to do this, I quickly reconstructed an incomplete version of the Arma 3 character skeleton. If you want to import an RTM animation, what we'll have to do is we'll have to select the armature first, and then go to the File, Import menu, and then Import Animation from an RTM. This option will only be available if we have an armature object currently selected in Blender. So we'll click on RTM, and let's go and find some RTM animations. Now, some of you who have dealt with RTM animations will probably know that RTMs have, very similarly to P3Ds, two main file types basically. The first one, both of them have the RTM extension, but the main difference between them is the first one is the so-called plain RTM, which we normally create in Object Builder or through Blender, which is the editable format. It is similar to the mload type P3D, which we can edit in Object Builder. And then there is the second file type, which is the binarized RTM, which still has the RTM extension, but it has a very different file structure, and it is not editable in Object Builder application by default. Now, with this being said, the plugin is made to work with both file type versions, so you can use this plugin to import animations from the base game into Blender and reference them. So let's go ahead and go to the unpacked game files and look for animsf, data, animations, and let's pick something. So let's go to um, actually not Halo. Let's go to movement, standing, running, none, none, and let's select one of the animations here. Um, let's go for this one, for example. And then there are a few options to the import. The first one is to make this the active animations. What this will do is it will import the animation as a new animation data block, and it will make it the new active data on the armature. You can disable this, and this will just create a data block. You can link it later if you want. Apply motion. Now this is an interesting one. RTM animations can have a movement motion vector baked into them, which is not actually part of the animation but tells the game what type of movement the character should make on the map while playing this animation. So this option allows to bake this animation, bake this movement into the animation itself. By default this is enabled. You can disable it. So for example, for running animations, if you have this enabled, the character will actually run in Blender, progress forward during running. If this is disabled, then the character will run in place. The movement will still happen. It will just not progress forward. Mute constraints. This is only kind of a utility function if you try to import an RTM onto an armature that has bone constraints on it. This will just disable the constraints during the import, which may or may not make the result actually be usable or not. This really depends on what kind of armature you're using. And then the last part of this import section is the frame mapping, which is kind of important. Now basically how the RTMs work is that they have a frame range from 0 to 1, and then every animation frame has a value somewhere between 0 and 1. But these are all obviously fractional values. Now the issue is that Blender can only have integer frame values. We cannot use fractional ones. So the add-on has to remap the RTM values to some Blender value. So the first one is the round frames. Um, this will basically just really take the frame value and round it to the nearest integer after the mapping. This will clean up some of the duplicate frames maybe um, that may appear in Blender. So it's generally recommended to leave this on. Now the more important part here is the mapping method for frame mapping. So the default option will be direct mapping, which means that the plugin will take the frames from the RTM one by one and create new frames in Blender for every one of them. This is normally fine because the RTM animations are normally evenly spaced, so the time between the keyframes in the RTM is constant. So this is fine usually. If you have an RTM that for some reason has variable timing between frames, the direct mapping method will distort the animation. Next, the first method is the range method, which what this does is it takes the frames from the RTM and remaps the range to the start and end range that we set here. So for example, in this case, if we have an animation, it will be stretched out between frame 1 and 250 in Blender after the import. And then the second one, the second last option basically is the FPS one, where we can actually like set an FPS and then also set how long the animation is supposed to take. So for example, if we have a Blender scene where we want to animate in 24 FPS and we know that we want to import an animation that is supposed to take 2 seconds or 3, then we can set the seconds here, set it 24 FPS, and then import, and this will remap the frames to a proper FPS, which will preserve, hopefully, the animation speed and dynamics. So for this demonstration, I will just simply use the direct method, which is fine in this case, and I'll just select the file and click on import with everything basically on default settings. And we can see that the process already finished. We can see that there have been a bunch of keyframes created. We can see all of them here basically. And then we can also play the animation. So if we click on play, we can see that this is the background's running animation diagonally to the left basically. And this will obviously loop. Now if we didn't hit apply motion, this animation would probably play in place. The character wouldn't move very far. And then basically the last thing about this animation import process is that the animation properties are also preserved during the import. So if this animation, if we didn't apply the motion will show up here. But since this is a very simple running animation, we basically don't have any extra properties here. Finally, a last note about the process. There is a very popular animation rig created for Arma animations in Blender. It is an excellent inverse kinematics rig used for all sorts of things. It is very good, very well usable, but sadly, this RTM import process will not work properly on it. The main reason for this is that the IK rig has many bone constraints, special attributes that are not really compatible with straight RTM importing. The RTM output from that rig will be proper in game mostly, but the process can't really be reversed. So just to quickly show this, I actually did download a fresh version of the Arma rig for Blender, and if I select the Arma character rig and I quickly switch back to object mode and go to import and find a similar animation to the previous one, so I will just go to A3 anims F data anim SDR, and then I will go to move standing run non-armed, and then this is probably the same one. So if I quickly go over to import, even though I did set the mute constraints, what we can see is that the character, certain parts of the character are very obviously not in the right place. Some parts of the animation might play as we expect them, but most of the animation will probably not move as we think it should. As you can see, the animation is clearly the running back animation which we expected, but some of the limbs are very dislocated from their proper position. This is mainly because of the point constraints and the IK system. Sadly, this is not very easily fixable. So RTM importing is realistically not really an option to this nice IK rig. Um, RTM importing is still mainly a preview or reference feature to use for creating new animations. Thank you.